On this Wednesday night, Canada's cost of borrowing climbs yet again. The central bank's trend-setting interest rate takes another hike.
We need the economy to slow.
The homeowners hardest hit, and what's your financial forecast? Step up to save the planet now. The UN's dire warning to countries to bolster their climate change goals. An Ontario woman's nightmare, how she says she was wrongfully charged with her husband's murder. A Global News exclusive.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Eric Sorensen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The Bank of Canada continued its push to bring down inflation today with yet another increase to its benchmark interest rate. Today's 50 basis point rise marks the central bank's sixth hike in just 7 months. The rapid hikes kicked off in March with a quarter-point rise, the first increase since October of 2018. In April, a further hike of half a percentage point, an identical jump in June. The rate then vaulted an entire percentage point in July, a move not seen since the 1990s. The increases eased slightly in September with a rise of 3/4 of a point. And with today's half-point increase, the bank rate now sits at 3.75%, a figure last seen in 2008. Even though inflation numbers are slightly improving, the central bank says more rate hikes are likely, adding to the economic pain already being felt by Canadians. And Gaviola begins our coverage tonight.
Another hefty rate hike with more in the mail.
We also expect our policy rate will need to increase further.
The bank is trying to cool the economy to bring inflation down.
Households and businesses want to buy more goods and services than the economy can produce, and this is driving prices up.
The announcement has an immediate impact on variable rate debt, including mortgages, though homeowners looking to renew soon, as well as prospective buyers, are watching all of this closely. The 50 basis point hike means this for a typical 5-year variable mortgage on a $600,000 home loan, a $165 increase in monthly payments to $3,370. The stress of rapidly rising borrowing costs is already taking a toll on households. According to a recent Ipsos poll for financial firm MNP, nearly 60% of us are concerned, and that's a new record. Coupled with inflation at multi-decade highs, debt experts worry about how cash-strapped families will cope.
And this is where the cycle comes in, the snowball effect, because if they get more debt, that debt will typically have more interest because you're likely going to put it on credit cards or lines of credit. And if those interest rates go up, they're going to be in a more difficult situation.
Politicians of all stripes continue to question the central bank's approach, fearing it's gone too far, too fast.
There are so many Canadians across this country looking at their mortgages thinking, with this increase, will I be able to afford to keep my home? Will I be able to pay my bills? That's a real risk.
This fear is driving homeowners to seek help from people like mortgage and real estate expert Victor Tran.
I have been receiving more calls and more emails than usual, especially since the last rate hike on September 7th.
The central bank pegs the chance of a recession, likely next year, at 50-50, which means the size of your financial cushion, your appetite for risk, and a contingency plan should all factor into your financial considerations.
And this is the central bank's sixth hike this year, but inflation remains stubbornly high. What do you think Canadians can expect in the coming months?
Tiff Macklem today reiterated the need for rates to go higher, and the majority of economists and investors do expect another rate hike from the Bank of Canada on December 7th at its next opportunity. What happens after that, though, is less clear. We do know that the Bank of Canada says it remains committed to getting inflation closer to its 2% target, and right now we are a long way from that. Eric?
Anne Gaviola in Toronto. Thank you, Anne. Canadian homeowners may feel today's rate hike the most. As Ross Lord explains, some are now thinking it's time to lock in their mortgage rates before they climb even higher.
Excellent. You can sit wherever you like.
Rising interest rates are making meetings like this one to finalize a mortgage agreement a bit more complicated.
So what day of the month do you want your payment to come out on?
For homebuyer Bruce Heron, the hardest part came beforehand. He already locked in his 5-year term.
I think there's always a pause when interest rates go up either 50 basis points or, where we've come from 2 to 3%-ish.
Although he prevented hundreds of dollars extra every month in mortgage payments, many other homeowners will be hard-pressed.
I see the clients that, are starting to be impacted by inflation. The clients that might be in an adjustable rate mortgage, that their payment went up even today with the Bank of Canada.
Finding the money by cutting costs elsewhere is harder than ever, with homeowners still facing double-digit price increases for food and other commodities. Offsetting the higher rates, buying a house costs less overall than earlier this year. And although interest rates are rising, in historical terms, they're still fairly low. Nothing like the extreme highs in parts of the 1980s, and lower even than most years before or since.
Yes, I certainly would not be banking on the Bank of Canada slowing things down.
If interest rates keep rising, homeowners whose locked-in rates are up for renewal in coming months could also be in for an eye-opening. Ross Lord, Global News, Halifax.
You think it's bad here? Inflation is even worse in the UK. People there are battling a cost of living crisis not seen in 40 years. Consumer prices rose 10.1% in September over last year. It is a real struggle to buy affordable food and to put heat in homes. And the country's political uncertainty hasn't helped. The new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is promising to tackle the profound economic crisis. But as Crystal Goomansingh reports, people need help now.
This will be £1.20. A tin of baked beans is doubled to £1.30. Everything's went up.
The cost of basic food supplies are rising and utilities are following suit. Domestic gas prices rose 96% based on the government's own data. Incomes stretched past their limit. People have hit the breaking point.
A lot of the people who used to donate are no longer in a position that they can donate, because they've lost their disposable income, and some of them actually come in to the food bank as well.
Dad's House is Park Community Centre Food Bank, an advocacy hub, a safe, supportive place for people in turbulent times. Measures have been implemented to ease the burden on people, including a reduction of the fuel duty by 5 pence. There's also been a rebate for council taxes in a number of areas and a cap on energy prices.
Well, there has been a lot of market turbulence, even in the last 48 hours. And the question is how you deal with that turbulence.
The government itself has been part of the problem. It's why the last Prime Minister fired her Chancellor and handed the financial portfolio to Jeremy Hunt. For stability, he was reappointed by the newest leader, Rishi Sunak.
My record is clear. When times are difficult in this country, I will always protect the most vulnerable.
How those words will be put into action won't be known for 3 more weeks. The government postponed the release of its fiscal plan to November 17th. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
Investors and analysts are expressing confidence the proposed merger between Rogers and Shaw can still go ahead. Yesterday, the industry minister said the government will not approve the wholesale transfer of wireless spectrum licenses between the two companies, putting the $26 billion merger in doubt. But the third party in that deal, Quebec's Videotron, says it's willing to accept the minister's conditions for its purchase of Freedom Mobile from Shaw. Another condition is the expectation wireless prices will be lowered by up to 20% in Ontario and Western Canada. Still some hang-ups for another proposed merger. The Federal Competition Bureau is raising concerns that WestJet's purchase of Sunwing Vacations would likely result in higher prices and decreased service for Canadian travelers. Both airlines dispute that finding. WestJet says it expects the deal will still get the necessary federal approval and close by the spring. The United Nations is urging countries to strengthen their climate change commitments following a new report that says current pledges are insufficient to limit the rise in global temperatures to the current 1.5-degree target.
And the big challenge lies within these G20 countries. It's important to get the whole G20 family on board because that group is responsible for 80% of the global emissions.
Under current climate pledges, the report says global temperatures are set to rise between 2.1 and 2.9 degrees Celsius by 2100. Even if countries meet their commitments, which researchers say many will not, the world's current trajectory means extreme events like intense flooding, wildfires, and drought will happen more often in the future. Two Canadian women who left the country to join ISIS, then were held for years in a detention camp in Syria, are now back in this country, along with two children. Both women were arrested upon arrival, but one, Kimberly Pullman, is no longer in custody. As Mercedes Stephenson reports, the repatriation represents an about-face by the federal government, which had previously refused to help bring Canadian citizens out of the camps.
ISIS is a shadow of its former self, degraded from menace to nuisance. But the brutality inflicted by the terror group has not been forgotten. And there has been little sympathy or political will to help Canadians who joined ISIS make their way home. That changed Tuesday after weeks of secret negotiations, when the Canadian government took custody of two Canadian women, Kimberly Pullman and Umayma Shway, as well as Shway's children in northeast Syria. A dramatic change from the government's previous position of refusing to help Canadians get out of the camps. Hours after the women left Syria, another first.
Last night, RCMP officers arrested Umayma Shway at the Montreal Trudeau Airport.
Both women were charged with terrorism offenses when they landed in Canada. Another major shift in what the RCMP had long said was not possible, gathering enough evidence from Syria to lay charges in Canada.
In Syria, it is alleged that she participated in terrorist activities in the name of the Islamic State.
Shway faced terrorism charges in a Quebec courtroom, while Pullman has been put under a terrorism bond in BC. Both women suffered from health problems which made them eligible under a new policy adopted by the government in 2021. But Pullman's lawyer said many Canadians in the detention camps are in the same situation, and it's time to bring more home, as several other allied countries have.
It demonstrates once again that the Canadian government is capable and without incident able to repatriate our Canadian citizens there.
The government has been under increasing pressure by human rights groups, the United Nations and the NDP to bring home Canadians, especially young children.
These are Canadian children living in abhorrent conditions. Their lives are at risk, and they are children.
The Liberal government would not say if these cases are the beginning of bringing home all Canadians, but hinted they have a roadmap now.
We continue to engage responsibly in the region, monitor closely. We have a framework around doing this. We've seen a couple of situations already, but it's important that people who travel for the purpose of supporting terrorism face consequences.
The 2021 policy for those with health conditions and the RCMP's ability to now lay charges may be a game changer for the government, but just how much political risk Justin Trudeau is willing to take remains to be seen. Eric?
Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa, thank you. An Ontario woman in her own words. Coming up, why she says she was wrongfully accused of her husband's murder. A jury in Michigan has convicted 3 men of aiding a plot to kidnap State Governor Gretchen Whitmer. The group was found guilty on 3 counts connected to the 2020 plot. They face up to 20 years in jail. Prosecutors said the men were members of a militia group that targeted Whitmer because of the pandemic restrictions she imposed. 10 others were arrested in connection with the plot, but not all have been convicted.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Darrell E. Brooks, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide. If you find the defendant guilty of...
The man who drove a speeding SUV into a Christmas parade in Waukesha, Wisconsin last November has been found guilty on all charges. 6 people died in the attack, including an 8-year-old boy and several members of the Dancing Grannies group. Prosecutors convinced the jury that Darrell Brooks intentionally drove his SUV through the parade after getting into a fight with his ex-girlfriend. He faces a mandatory life sentence. Now to a Global News exclusive, the story of an Ontario woman who says she was wrongfully charged with murder. She says the accusations destroyed her life. And as Karen Lieberman explains, she's now fighting to piece it all back together.
When you're locked up in a room that has no real light and you can't see the sky outside and you can't have that fresh air, and those are things that everyone takes for granted every single day.
For 6 weeks, Melissa Sheridan sat in a jail cell accused of a crime she didn't commit.
So I was confused how they could ever think I had something to do with this.
In October 2020, Brant Burke, Sheridan's husband from whom she'd been separated, was found dead on a trail in Killarney, Ontario. He'd been shot in the back twice at close range. A month later,
she asked me to step out of the vehicle and told me that I was being charged with Brant Burke's murder, and it was a first-degree murder charge.
She would later learn it was Burke's brother, Kerry, who had implicated her after he confessed to the killing.
It actually blew my mind to know that I was arrested for a crime I didn't commit.
Kerry Burke claimed he and Melissa had been intimate and that she'd offered him cash and the home he and Brant were living in to carry out the murder.
I was automatically remanded on suicide watch for 24 hours.
No opportunity to phone home, no contact with her young son and daughter.
Describe the conditions when you were in jail.
There's no sleep, right? The lights are always on. You're never in darkness. You know, it's mouse infested.
When Sheridan was finally released on strict bail conditions, her children were not allowed to live with her.
They ruined my life. They've ruined my reputation. They've damaged my children.
For nearly 20 months, in the eyes of the law and her community, Sheridan was considered an accused killer.
When we were finally able to go to a preliminary trial, and after what was supposed to be 3 days, was a couple hours, and then the Crown withdrew the charge. There's never even been an acknowledgement of the mistake, right? The travesty that was done.
Sheridan has given notice that she intends to sue the Ontario Provincial Police and the Wikwemikong Tribal Police as the murder took place on First Nation territory. Counsel for Police declined to comment given the matter is before the courts.
And it's about trying to recover some compensation for what's been done to her for the last 2 years, for which the police still haven't apologized.
Sheridan says her life may never be back to normal.
It's very disappointing that this is where our justice system is at, and that there's no repercussions and there's no acknowledgement of the grave mistake that was made.
If this happened to her, she says, it can happen to anyone. Karen Lieberman, Global News, Toronto.
And we have this update in the case. Late today, Kerry Burke, Brant Burke's brother, was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 15 years. Cleaning product cleanup. Ahead, wide-scale recall of a popular brand. More than 500 Canadian gymnasts are renewing their calls for the federal government to launch an investigation into their sport.
I believe our survivors and children deserve to be protected, and a national inquiry is that first meaningful step to make gymnastics safer.
Gymnasts for Change Canada has released a letter calling on Canada's sports minister to launch an investigation into what it calls the toxic culture entrenched in Canadian gymnastics. Last week, Gymnastics Canada signed on to work with a new Office of the Sport Integrity Commissioner, but Gymnasts for Change says it will not move forward with a commissioner assessment because it lacks the substance and scope to tackle the problems. China has begun administering what's believed to be the world's first inhalable COVID-19 vaccine. It works by sucking a mist in through the mouth. For now, it's being offered in Shanghai as a free booster dose. There are no vaccine mandates in China, but stiff restrictions are in place. Health officials hope the needle-free alternative will encourage more people to get the vaccine. Popular cleaning brand Clorox is recalling 37 million bottles of its Pine Sol cleaners. There are fears they may be contaminated with harmful bacteria. The company says 3 Pine Sol scents are being recalled: Lavender Clean, Lemon Fresh, and Mandarin Sunrise. In Canada, 7.6 million products made between January 2021 and September 2022 are under recall. Affected bottles also share the date code you can see on screen. Clorox says the bacteria can be harmful to those with weaker immune systems and poses a risk of serious infection. And that's Global National for this Wednesday night. I'm Eric Sorensen. Tonight's Your Canada is Twillingate, Newfoundland and Labrador. Thanks for watching and have a good night.